Hello, everyone, and welcome in to a special edition here of the RTI podcast. I am Nathaniel Rutherford, the managing editor of RockyTopInsider.com, joined today by Derek Terry of the Cat's Paws 247. He is the Kentucky beat writer who covers Kentucky football, basketball for 247 Sports over on the Cat's Paws 247, and I'm bringing him on for the special edition just of an interview podcast to talk everything about the Kentucky Wildcats. Derek, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've had you on before. You do great work over there at the Cat's Paws, and you bring some really good coverage for Kentucky football and basketball. So happy to have you back on. Derek, this is a pivotal matchup for both teams. Both teams looking to get to bowl eligibility. Both teams have 4 wins right now. Both teams have dealt with injuries to quarterback, and you know, coming into the season, both schools thought they kind of had their quarterback situation figured out. Obviously, with Kentucky with Terry Wilson looking to build off of, he showed some promise last year. Tennessee with Jarrett Garantano, who also showed promise. They both, both schools thought, hey, we got a guy who's going to come in and start all 12 games of the regular season. That hasn't been the case. Obviously, Terry Wilson sustains the season-ending injury. Garantano didn't play well, so he lost his job, and he's filled in the last couple weeks, but now he's got a little bit of an injury himself. But Derek, I'm very curious because Kentucky doesn't just have an injury to Terry Wilson. They've had an injury to Sawyer Smith, and they had to turn to Lynn Bowden Jr., who's a very dynamic playmaker, turn to him at quarterback. So I'm very curious right now what Mark Stoops has said this week about the quarterback situation. Is Sawyer Smith healthy enough to come play, or even if he is, do you think they still kind of keep Lynn Bowden Jr. in there at quarterback? So what should all fans maybe expect from Kentucky's quarterback situation?
I think Lynn Bowden will definitely start. They found a little bit of a identity, I guess you could say, something that they really hadn't had. I mean, the Kentucky under Eddie Gran typically has been a very run-heavy team, and a lot of that just has coincided with Benny Snell being there. I mean, those first 3 years of Eddie Gran's tenure, Benny was there, and also Boom Williams back in 2016, so it just made the most sense to run the ball. And with Lynn back there, they've been able to get back to that, because when Sawyer was in there, they were throwing the ball 30 to 40 times a game, which has been out of the norm. They were never doing that last year with Terry Wilson. But with Lynn back there, I think he's only attempted like in the 30s in terms of pass attempts. So a lot of runs. And Lynn, like you said, he's very dynamic. That's the one thing I would say. Even obviously for Tennessee fans, they won't just be casual observers. They'll very much have a stake in what's happening on the field Saturday. But I just think if anyone's been able to watch Lynn play quarterback, it's exciting to watch. He played quarterback in high school, but obviously that's a much different, whole different deal than playing quarterback in the Southeastern Conference. But running the ball, Kentucky's been very good. They rushed for, I want to say 330 against Arkansas, which in a vacuum. I mean, Arkansas I think last week gave up like 800 yards. That's exaggerating, but I mean I think Kylan Hill had over 200. I mean Arkansas can't stop anybody. Against Georgia, though, even though Kentucky didn't score, that game was like played in the monsoon, and Lynn had 99 yards. If he would have gotten one more yard, he would have been the first player this season to rush for over 100 yards against Georgia's defense. But Kentucky as a team had 177, which is the most Georgia's given up this year. And then against Missouri last week, Lynn had 204 yards by himself. So those are the past two teams, at least statistically. Of course, Georgia's very good defensively than Missouri. Had a very good defense too, at least by the numbers coming into the game. And Kentucky was able to have some success running the ball. It was probably their most complete game on offense with Lynn back there. And we'll see what happens this week. I know, at least on Tennessee's side, there's some optimism with how they've played against teams that you would deem as one-dimensional, which I think is fair to say about Kentucky, given that Lynn Bowden's not going to be a guy who's going to most likely beat you a ton throwing the ball. Although I would say, it's not like he has a noodle arm or anything back there. I mean, he hit a 44-yard completion to Bryce Oliver against Missouri. Mm-hmm. He's hit a few deep shots. He had a kind of a corner fade to Cleveland Thomas in his first start that went for a touchdown. So certainly not like a dynamic guy like, say, Kelly Bryant. I'm not trying to give that impression at all. But certainly a guy who can hurt you on the ground. And what I'll be curious to see, though, going back to Sawyer, is if Kentucky, because they've really not been in a spot this year where they absolutely just had to throw the ball, no questions asked, with Lynn at quarterback, I should say, those last 3 games. I would be curious if Kentucky does get in that spot, maybe if they get down by a couple touchdowns, what Mark would do. I think Sawyer's at a point now where he should be healthy enough to play. He got in against Missouri once Lynn went out for a few plays and completed a pass But we'll see. I do think there's actually a decent chance you'll see Sawyer Smith in this game, but I think they'll roll with Lynn to start and just see where it goes.
That's kind of what I figured, because and that's makes me concerned a little bit more about this game, because we said earlier this week on the regular RTI podcast, my staff writer Ben McKee and I, that we both actually felt a lot better about Tennessee's chances if Sawyer Smith actually started and played more at quarterback, because like you said, Bowden's just he's just so dynamic with the ball in his hands, and I don't know that we've really been able to tell how good or bad of a passer he is, because I mean, 2 of the last 3 games that Kentucky's played have been in downpours. I mean, that Missouri game it looked awful. They've not played in good weather very often lately. So I mean, Bowden hasn't had a chance to really throw it. So I think that's that's a really good point. Speaking, still kind of talking about Kentucky's offense and who they have at playmaker. I really like Rose as a running back. I know Bowden and Rose both back there with the ball, running the ball. That's a very dangerous duo for Kentucky of just 2 good runners. But with Bowden at quarterback, who does that leave for him to throw the ball to? Because you mentioned, they don't throw it a whole lot with him back there, because I mean, he's also just not a trained quarterback. But if he's in a passing situation, or if Sawyer Smith's in a passing situation and it's not going to Bowden, who else does Kentucky have that's a pass catcher? And then and just kind of another question to that too, how good has Kentucky's offensive line been this season? Because I know they were touted as having a pretty good offensive line. Last year they had a very good one, but I'm curious, just kind of 2 questions in this one. Who's going to catch passes if not Bowden, and then what about Kentucky's offensive line?
Yeah, so wide receiver, it's kind of funny. I'm not sure how familiar Tennessee fans are with this guy, because he didn't play a whole lot last year, but Ahmad Wagner is basically like a pass interference specialist. I don't have the numbers now. It was ridiculous to start his career. I think something like 15 out of the first 18 passes, I want to say, that went his way in college were either completions or pass interference calls. It was a crazy high percentage of what I would call a successful play. I mean, if you draw a flag and you get 15 yards out of it, that's a successful play. He's probably the one guy. He had a little bit of an injury against Missouri, but it sounds like he'll be back for Tennessee. I think it was a leg injury, but he's a guy that if they're in a spot where it's like, 3rd and long, I'm being serious. Like, their best play might be to just try to draw a pass interference to Wagner by throwing it deep to him. They've used that quite a bit. And I also like Kentucky's tight ends quite a bit. Justin Rigg and Keaton Upshaw. Keaton Upshaw is a guy I think people will know more about in the years to come when Kentucky has a little bit more stability at quarterback. He's like 6'6", 260, and can run. A really physically looking good kid. Kids that UK typically has not had in the past. He had a touchdown catch against Florida. Hasn't really done a whole lot since then, just given that none of UK's receivers have, because they've not been throwing the ball. And another wide receiver to keep in mind is Josh Ali. He's the most veteran guy out there, a junior receiver from Florida who I think was probably poised to have a little bit bigger year had Terry Wilson still been the quarterback. He had really good reviews in spring and fall practice, but he's kind of been relegated to blocking like a lot of those guys have. But as far as the offensive line, it's been hard to say. Personally, I think they've been very good, but they've probably, drawn some criticism from fans. But you got to keep in mind, when Sawyer Smith, even when he was still starting, like against South Carolina, he was probably too hurt to be playing in those games, to be honest with you. I mean, I don't know if you got to watch that game. UK had no chance on offense to do anything, and he was just kind of a sitting duck. And that's hard for an offensive line whenever a defense can just pin its ears back and not have to worry at all about a quarterback taking off and running. Where now, with Lynn back there, all of a sudden the offensive line looks a lot better. But one area that, whether it's been play calling or the offensive line or just a combination, Kentucky's been very bad in 3rd and short this year, like very bad. Prior to the, I think, Missouri game, Kentucky on 3rd and less than 2, I think, only had like a 39% conversion rating. So it was far and away the worst in the league. That's been an issue this year. I don't remember really popping up against Missouri. I mean, truthfully, that Missouri game, I think Kentucky played very well. I want to give a lot of credit to UK, but I also felt like Missouri did not want to be there. I don't think they were really up for that kind of gritty, rainy night, whereas UK was. But the offensive line it's led by 3 guys who were high school All-Americans, U.S. Army All-Americans in high school. Landon Young did not play against Tennessee last year. He was out with a meniscus injury. He didn't play at all last season, but he's their highest-rated guy actually ever. Stoops assigned. He was a 5-star left tackle from Lexington, very good player. Drake Jackson's been a 3-year starter at center. Logan Stenberg in the middle is probably going to get drafted. And then at right tackle, Darian Kennard, another big sophomore, a kid who's actually from Knoxville, moved to Cleveland growing up, and I think came down to Kentucky and Tennessee actually for his services. So good player, and really not a whole lot of depth there, though. I mean, over the years, Kentucky's rotated a lot of guys there, 8, 9 at times, whereas this year they'll play Nasir Watkins and then Mason Wolf. They pretty much have a 7-man rotation this season.
Gotcha. Okay, that's good to know. And the third down situation, I actually didn't realize it was that bad. And now looking at their stats, I mean, they've been pretty bad, as you said. I mean, this look at that doesn't show specifically third and short, but it's kind of third down overall. I mean, they have the worst one in the SEC except for Vanderbilt. So I actually didn't realize that till just now. Moving over to the opposite side of the ball on defense, look at the numbers. Kentucky's pass defense has been pretty good this year. Run defense, however, once again, just like their third down offense, it looks like it's one of the worst in the SEC. And it's been, they did well against Missouri last week. Only gave 125 yards, less than 4 yards per carry. But Mississippi State had a field day against them. South Carolina had a field day against them. Georgia obviously did too. Even Arkansas was efficient. Didn't get as much numbers as the other guys, but they actually averaged more yards per carry than the other teams I just mentioned. Florida, who hasn't done a good job this year running the ball. I think that one's a little inflated because in that game they had a huge run at the end there that kind of inflated that number. But how big of a concern has Kentucky's run defense been? And I look at that as an area that maybe Tennessee can exploit. Is it because is the front seven defensive line not played up to par? I'm just kind of curious what the issues have been with Kentucky in stopping the run this year.
Yeah, so you kind of brought up a point I wanted to make, and you could probably say this about any team. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes stats can lie. You mentioned the long run for Florida. I want to give credit to Kylan Hill. Kylan Hill, he really played well against Kentucky, but I think Garrett Schrader ended up being the leading rusher in that game.
Yeah, I think so.
He had 40, I think it was like a 3rd and 4, and UK sold out to try to. And listen, these runs, they all count. You can't just cherry pick stats. I'm not trying to do that. Florida had a very long run at the end of the game that inflated those numbers. Mississippi State, in a situation where UK pretty much brought a zero blitz to try to get a stop in the backfield. He busted through it, had 49 yards, I think, on one run, and then 17 yards on the next one. Those added a lot. And then you also add in, I think, another area like South Carolina. Given the fact that Kentucky could not convert a third down that game, they couldn't stay on the field, that led to a lot of plays for South Carolina. And obviously whenever your defense is on the field a lot more, the other team does a lot of plays, the yards are going to add up. I really haven't thought too much that UK's run defense has been a big issue in recent weeks. Even Georgia. I mean, Georgia had DeAndre Swift. That was kind of the difference. But in the first half, Kentucky was very good stopping the run. Georgia had a lot of either negative plays or plays that didn't go for very much yardage, and then eventually they just realized, hey, we got DeAndre Swift. We can kind of do what we want with him. And that was the difference there. Missouri last week didn't really have a whole lot. And then going back to Arkansas, another way to say it was inflated, Rakeem Boyd had a 74-yard touchdown on the second play of the game.
Wow.
And I think they ended up with less than – I don't remember how many yards they ended up with, but that was – the big chunk was right there. So what I would say is if Tennessee can get some chunk plays, that'll be big. So basically UK is not like getting gashed 4 or 5 yards every single play. They're very big up front. I think the front seven, quite frankly, is pretty good. They're young, but the defensive line is a veteran group. The linebackers are kind of young. Chris Oates, in my opinion, will be a household name in the SEC linebacker before he leaves UK. He was probably the biggest recruiting win Kentucky's had. They recruit Ohio a lot, and a lot of those kids, maybe at some point they claimed an Ohio State offer. Like, Oates is one of the kids who legitimately could have gone to Ohio State and chose UK. So he'll be playing. Cash Daniel will be back. Remains to be seen how much he'll play. But kind of another point I wanted to make about the rushing is if you only look at the stats, you would think the passing defense is very good. But teams haven't really had to throw it a ton. But I think Kentucky's only given up one passing touchdown since – I think Missouri was the only team that had a screen pass that went for 74 yards. Georgia didn't throw for a touchdown. Arkansas, I don't believe, did, and neither did South Carolina.
Let's see. Since the Florida game, Missouri's the only team that has thrown a touchdown against Kentucky this season.
Yeah, so I mean, they've been fine back there, especially for a pretty young group. But I actually like Tennessee's matchup with Kentucky's secondary. If they have a quarterback, I really don't know if it's going to be Garantano or Maurer or even Shroud. I don't know who it's going to be, but Callaway and Jennings that's a hell of a duo to go up against. And I think that's an area where Tennessee could have some advantages because Kentucky's corners for years under Stoops they were tall, lanky guys, whereas this year I think Eccles is like 5'11". He's UK's best cover corner. Jamari Brown and Cedric Dort have been fine, but they've really not been tested a ton recently. So I think that's one area where Tennessee, in my opinion, probably more so than running the ball. I think they'll have more success passing than running.
That's interesting. And you're talking about, chunk plays for Tennessee running the ball. They actually, looking up the stats in Kentucky's, kind of middle, lower half of the SEC in terms of giving up 10, 20, 30-yard runs. Tennessee this season, I knew it was a low number. I didn't realize this low, but they're actually last in the SEC in 10-yard plus runs and 20-yard plus runs. Tennessee's only had 8 runs this whole entire season of 20 or more yards. So that they don't have. They've not done a good job of being able to rip off a bunch of big chunk plays this year. They were better at last year running the ball, oddly enough, even though Tennessee was not very good running the ball last year. So that's an interesting point you make. You mentioned Cash Daniel and his injury and him probably being able to play this weekend. We've also talked about Sarius Smith. Kentucky's come off a bye week, so they had a chance to kind of heal up a little bit. What is the injury situation like for the Wildcats heading into this game?
Yeah, with Wagner, he should be back. Wagner didn't practice at all last week, though. I don't know how rusty he'll be. I'm sure it was a pretty light week regardless, just given the fact that they weren't preparing for a game. Mm-hmm. Cash has had, I believe, concussion issues. It sounds like he'll be back, but I'm not sure that Oates won't play more than him anyway. But it'll certainly help the depth. I mean, that's an area where, obviously the linebackers are hitting a lot. You don't want to have as many guys as possible healthy in there, and he'll certainly play. Besides that, they're in pretty good shape. Like, I think Sawyer is probably as healthy as he's going to be able to get this season. He's not really played at all since September 28th. He's not taking a hit since September 28th. Phil Hoskins on the defensive line is actually interesting. Unfortunately for him, he got hurt pregame against Florida. He was suspended academically the first 2 games, and then it's just kind of a freak injury in warm-ups. So he won't be available. Might actually be able to get another year next year. But overall, Kentucky's pretty healthy, and I think Kentucky kind of lucked out with the schedule this year with the byes because they played 5 games, had a bye, and then only played 3. So it feels like they kind of were just coming off of a bye, and they already had another one. So to be this late in the year, I think they're going to be fairly well, fairly healthy going into these final 4 games.
I got to ask it, kind of wrapping up here a little bit, I got to ask about the question about Mark Stoops because we saw earlier this week that, in this Monday press conference, he was asked about it, but then I think that same day, or if it was maybe the next day, you had all this stuff come out about, what about Bob Stoops, and it looks like he could be zeroed in as a candidate, and then he came out and said, I'm not interested. How much of it, I don't imagine, obviously Coach Stoops is going to let on to it, but I don't know if players have said anything about it either, but in your opinion, Derek, how much of a distraction, or really any distraction, has this whole Mark Stoops and Florida State thing been?
I would say for the team, I don't think it's been anything too big. I would say come Saturday, that won't even be a topic. I think more so on the recruiting trail has been where they've had to put out some fires, as the way Vince Miro said it, the recruiting coordinator, which makes a little bit more sense. I mean, the guys on the current roster are with Stoops every day. I think they kind of know the way Stoops phrases it, they know where his heart is. I just don't see it being that big of a factor. I don't know. Ultimately, I mean, I think I don't know where Florida State search is going to go. If Stoops is a serious candidate there, I think he absolutely has to consider it. But I think Kentucky's actually positioned pretty well. I'm pretty optimistic about their future. A lot was made about last year, as it should have been, given that they had basically never had that much success. But I think top to bottom, in terms of pure talent on the roster, I think it's going to be better in the coming years. They're about to sign their best class ever. They already have a ton of underclassmen who are performing pretty well right now. You add in the interesting possibility of Joey Gatewood, the transfer from Auburn, who's visiting the UK this weekend. And, I mean, I really think they could be a really solid team in the years to come. But I would guess it'd be hard for Stoops with his ties to Florida State, which I think might be overruling a little bit. He was only there for 3 years. Some very good teams with Jimbo. But, I mean, Jimbo left on his own to go to Texas A&M. I just don't know that – I'm not trying to sit here and say UK's job's better than Florida State. I just think in a typical year, Whereas Kentucky's outlook is pretty good for the future versus Florida State, that's in a little bit of a mess in terms of the recruiting class is now falling apart. They fired a coach after, I think, 21 games, which probably does not sit well, I would guess, in the coaching industry for a job that looks like it's going to be quite a bit of a rebuild. So, but to get back to your original question, I don't think it'll be too much of a distraction for now. I mean, maybe come late November, if those rumors ramp up even more, then yeah, I could see it being a bigger issue then.
Yeah, I'll be very interested to see what they do because I think Florida State, not to knock Mark Stoops, he just to me isn't he's not one of those big names like obviously his brother Bob. It's not like a bigger name like that. So I'll be curious to see what Florida State does if their situation is conducive to bringing in one of those quote unquote big names, or if they had to go kind of tier 2. And I think Mark Stoops would be. I mean, he's done a great job at Kentucky. I think he'd be a good fit there. It just would be a matter of this Florida State feel like they have a bigger job than what they think they do. Look at Tennessee for the last times they look for a head coach. There's been a lot of fans hoping for the big name, but the situation at Tennessee wasn't conducive to bringing a big name in. So I'll be curious to see what Florida State does. You touched on recruiting there. Kentucky's got a strong class right now in this 2020 class, and they brought in a pretty good class last year too. They've got a lot of guys visiting. You mentioned Gatewood visiting. I think Justin Rogers is going to be there, who's obviously a commit, but I think he's going to be in town for the game. Just looking at, you would know more than I do who's coming in, but is this the biggest recruiting weekend of the season for Kentucky, whereas maybe the Florida game? I'm just curious, is this kind of the one where Kentucky's kind of circled as we're going to bring in a lot of guys for this game?
Yeah, I think it's kind of turned into that, like over the past week probably. Like the Florida game had a ton of official visitors. I think you'll probably look back on signing day. I'm going to guess a lot of those kids who visited that weekend end up signing with UK, whereas this weekend, they're going to have the commitments on campus. Rogers is a big one, which is interesting. Rogers, he chose Kentucky over Tennessee, and I think kind of the consensus, even from people on UK side, was like, this kid, he's been kind of up and down his recruiting, kind of wherever he visits becomes a favorite, but I've been quite frankly a little bit stunned kind of how quiet it's been for him since he committed to UK. He visited Alabama. Yeah, he visited Alabama, I think, within the month when he committed to UK. And after that, it's been absolutely nothing. He made a couple of visits to Lexington that were very under the radar in the summer, hanging out with Bo Allen, who's UK's quarterback commitment. And to get him back down this weekend is really good for UK. The name we didn't mention is Tyler Barron, who's going to be back as well for an unofficial visit. And at this point, it sounds like it's Tennessee, Ohio State, and UK for his services. Obviously for Tyler, it'll be a chance to, I know he's very familiar with Tennessee, but another chance to see UK, but also have the Vols there too to watch. So to me, it makes a lot of sense for him to be there if that's the two teams he's really deciding between. But with Gatewood, Gatewood's very interesting because pretty much ever since he entered the portal, UK has been linked to him, and I think it makes a lot of sense certainly for UK, given if he can't play next year, which I don't think he'll be able to. I doubt he'll get a waiver. He, in my opinion, would be a pretty heavy favorite to win the QB job in 2021. So if you're looking to stay within the SEC, I doubt there's a more favorable depth chart. But more along the lines of the atmosphere, though, Nathaniel, like Josh Allen is going to be back in town. That I think will excite a lot of people. I would expect a great crowd. I would think a lot of Tennessee fans will make the way up, short drive from Tennessee to Lexington. And I think for UK, we touched on a little bit just how big of a game this is, not only for both teams. I think both teams will end up in a bowl anyway. So for the bowl pecking order in terms of the games, I think a lot's kind of riding on this game, and I think the fans are going to be into it. Having the recruits there, having Josh Allen there, it's really setting up for a really great weekend in Lexington, win or lose for UK. I think it'll be something they can use in recruiting going forward because I'm guessing it'll probably be the second best atmosphere this year behind the Florida game. It'll be better, you never know.
Yeah. I'd be very. I think it's going to be a very loud environment. I'm not sure. I've not been to Kroger Field, so I don't know how loud it actually does get there. But I imagine this will be. It'll be I'd be surprised if it's not a sold out game because, as you said, I think Kentucky fans are very excited, and I think Tennessee fans are excited because it's very much a winnable game for either school. It's now been bet down to, I believe, a toss-up, essentially, in Vegas. So it's going to be. I would be surprised if it wasn't close, heading into the fourth quarter of this game. Derek, kind of last question here. It's in Lexington. I feel like every time this game is in Lexington, it's a nighttime kickoff, which means every time it's always in late October, early November. So it always feels like it's at night. It's cold. Is that gonna be the case? Is that the weather prediction looking like for Lexington right now? Is it's going to be a kind of a cold late night kickoff again?
Yeah, I think the high on Saturday is supposed to get to 50, which isn't horrible
Jeez.
for November.
Yeah,
But by
but to be
night, yeah, I
nighttime,
would
yeah.
imagine. Yeah, once the sun's gone, I would imagine it'll be kind of cold. But man, I gotta tell you, probably for UK fans, they'll probably welcome that compared to what they've had to sit through if they went to
Sure.
Georgia the last 2 weeks. I mean, it wasn't cold the Missouri game. It actually felt pretty good outside, but it didn't stop raining throughout the whole game. And same deal with Georgia. So a little bit cold. I mean, it seems like kind of like football weather to me. To sit out there in the cold. I don't know where Tennessee recruits all other guys. I imagine they're from the South. UK does too, but a lot of Ohio kids on UK's roster that kind of are used to that
Yep.
type of weather. But you're right though, man. I wish kind of on off subject. I wish that the SEC would do a little bit more rearranging with the schedule. I mean, every year UK kind of plays the same teams late in the year. I would like to see maybe one year Tennessee move up to even September, early October, have a game there, and UK plays Florida pretty much first in the SEC every single year. How about that game goes to November, something like that, just to change it up for the fans, because I'm sure I know Wes Rucker likes to say that I think Lexington, or he still calls it Commonwealth Stadium, is the a frozen tundra or whatever. And I swear, man, living here, it's really not that cold in Lexington. I mean, it is in the winter like anywhere else, but in terms of it just seems like every time Tennessee comes, they just happen to be here when it's freezing. I mean, you go back to early October, there were records being set for how hot it was. It was 95 degrees on October 1st. So I mean, I doubt, even looking at the climate, I doubt Lexington's really that much colder than Knoxville really during most of football season. But either way, with no rain, hopefully that'll change things, because UK just had to play. That's probably helped UK actually with the rain being the way it was, given that they don't really want to throw the ball anyway, and kind of forcing them to stay on the ground. I think it's probably helped UK, but to have a clear game, I'll be looking forward to a clean surface.
I 100% agree with you on the scheduling thing, and that's why I'm a little, I don't think it'll matter. I think Georgia will still beat Tennessee next year, but I'm excited to see the fact that Georgia and Tennessee will play in November next year. And I think, if I remember correctly, Tennessee plays Missouri a lot earlier in the season, because that's usually another team that they've had Tennessee playing in November. They have Tennessee playing Missouri, I believe, in September next year. I would love it if Tennessee and Florida played later in the season. As you mentioned, Kentucky and Florida played early in the year. Tennessee and Florida, it's almost always Tennessee's first SEC game is against Florida, so I would be happy to see that game get pushed back. And I agree with you. I think there's just seems like the SEC likes. I mean, obviously, I like tradition in the SEC. I love the tradition of college athletics in general, but sometimes it feels like we get a little stuck in the tradition and don't want to move for just kind of arbitrary reasons. But Derek, this has been fantastic. Hopefully, their listeners have a better feel for Kentucky and kind of what to expect this weekend. And we'll definitely have you on in a few months for basketball season, because obviously it's going to be fun this year between Tennessee and Kentucky, like it always is. But I think this year a totally different dynamic for both teams. It'll be very interesting to see what happens. But we'll have to have you on again in basketball season. But for anyone who wants to follow along for football and basketball, now that's kind of the crossover with both seasons. Where can everybody find your work, and where can they follow you?
Yeah, online. If you go to catspaws.com, they'll take you to UK's 24/7 site. You can see all of our work there. And then on Twitter, my handle is @Derek DEREKS Terry. That's where I tweet a lot of the links to my work. But those are pretty much the only two spots. I try to stay off Facebook as much as I can, and Instagram's obviously a great place to link your work. So Twitter's there, and then the Cat's Paws website.
Awesome, Derek. Well, thank you so much for joining me in the podcast.
All right, thank you.